Hi, everybody. This is Rich Straffolino here. We're about to start the Gestalt IT rundown in just a moment. You may notice my shot is a little bit more crowded than normally is. It's also much more uh, larger, I guess, usually because there's two windows. Now there's just one window. And of course, it's because I have the big boss man, Stephen Foskett, standing to my right, to your left on the video, thanks to the power and principles of optics. That's how it works. In your
Right on.
mind's eye, though, you're to my right.
In my mind's eye, I'm always to your
Always
right.
to your right. We have a packed show. So Stephen, are you ready to get going?
I'm ready to get going. Indeed,
Listen,
I'm thrilled to be here. I'm also a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
that's terrifying. So I will not move
I
for the
will
rest of the show.
attempt not to eat you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, let's get started. Then I will turn into an announcer man, and then we will do the show. Hello, all, and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, your weekly look at the IT news of the week. I'm your host, Rich Straffolino. I'm an editor here at Gestalt IT. Joining me to my right, and now always next to my heart, is, of course, the one, the only, Stephen Foskett. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Rich, it's great to be here, and it's great to have you here. We're here.
We are in the same physical space. We're joined by the big red
Same
wall.
physical. Look at that wall. That wall is just gorgeous.
It truly is. And also gorgeous is one of my favorite segments we do on the show. It's a little something we like to call news or nah. A lot of news comes out every week. Sometimes we can't cover it all in quite a discussion detail length, but I want to get Steven's take here on whether something is news or not, and a one sentence rebuttal is allowed. First up here, a federal claims court senior judge dismissed Oracle's complaint that the awarding of the $10 billion Jedi Pentagon cloud project violated federal procurement laws and was awarded with conflicts of interest. Supposedly, there was someone that had worked for Amazon, had been part of the Pentagon process, and then has since gone back to work for Amazon. The judge said Oracle could not demonstrate the former, indicating the conflict of interest, and that it didn't really meet the criteria to bid in the first place. So stop your whining. News or not here, Stephen?
I gotta say, nah. I mean, raise your hand if you thought Oracle was going to win this anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like maybe they were hoping for some sort of scraps or some sort of mandate that they would have to split this contract to more than one vendor, but that doesn't look like it's
I
going to
really
be the
feel like
case.
this lawsuit was Oracle's best chance of getting this business. And I mean, it works for Boeing and companies like that. So why not for Oracle?
Yeah. Next up here, ARM launched Flexible Access, a new licensing model designed to help startups get easier access to ARM's intellectual properties without upfront licensing costs. Previously, the only way to access ARM's IP was to select products you wanted from and license them upfront. Flexible access terms now allow partners to get access to the IP and only pay per unit royalty fee once they go into production, changing up their licensing for ARM. News or not here, Stephen?
I think this could be news. It depends on what we see come out of it. I mean, ARM is undoubtedly the big challenger for instruction set, and if this means that we see more creative, clever, interesting ARM chips out there from smaller companies and third parties, I think this could be exciting. But for now,
Well, and it's interesting that this comes out right as they're potentially losing a big licensee in the form of Huawei. So maybe trying to expand their customer base as
oh
well.
wow, that's an interesting take. I hadn't thought about that.
Next up here, in a seeming effort to be used by less people, Facebook Workplace announced it will raise prices as of September 2nd. The free workplace essential tier will remain. So, free people, I guess the five of you that are using that, congratulations. But paid tiers are going from a flat fee of $3 per user, and now they're adding new tiers. One is called Workplace Advanced. That'll cost $4 per user. And it seems like that's going to just be an exact replica, just with a slight price increase. And then there is Workplace Enterprise, which will cost $8 per user per month while offering quicker support guarantees and early access to new features. Pretty typical enterprise service kind of agreements there. Also, frontline employees notably will only cost $1.50 on paid tiers. So people that are cashiers and stuff like that that don't necessarily working back of house will only use this maybe in a more ancillary fashion, getting access to that at a much lower price. Workplace changes. News or not here, Stephen?
What is this thing again? No, it's funny. I actually talked to somebody who works for a company that uses this,
Mhm.
and they said nobody uses it and we hate it.
it really it really reminds me of like Google Hangouts, that where Google was like, hey, we're going to make this an enterprise thing. It was like a teleconferencing thing. Now it's going to be this enterprise. You
Mhm.
have your groups and stuff like that. And I actually used to work for an educational institution that they still kind of use, like they opted into it with G Suite, but it was just something that was there and no one ever used. And I feel like that's the exact same thing with Workplace. Supposedly they have 2 million active users. I don't know what that is. Also notable about this is that this pricing is not per active user, so it's just per user. So if you don't use it for a month, Facebook will still charge you, which tells you that not a lot of people are using it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with nah.
All right, CNBC reports the previous acquisition talks between Symantec and Broadcom have stopped, according to sources. The hangup appears to be that Symantec will not accept an offer less than $28 a share. It appears Broadcom lowered their initial offering after they did their due diligence. So they looked at some of the financials, were like,
Yeah, that's not so good.
28.15, not going to work. Broadcom acquiring less software here, Stephen. News or not?
No, this could just be a negotiating tactic. I mean, who knows? This time next week, we might be saying, "Oh yeah, they decided to do it anyway." Um, but I don't know. Who cares?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting from a viability standpoint that Broadcom feels like they need to make these pretty substantial software acquisitions. Acquiring CA Technologies last year, now looking at Symantec. They were also looking at an enterprise infrastructure startup, or not startup company. I don't recall the name now. It was mentioned in the story links if you look at our show notes. So they're very seriously looking into the software market. So, but also not willing to sell the farm, I guess, to get there if it's not a good business deal.
Yeah, frankly, that's good for them. If they're not willing to overpay for something that then that's great.
Yeah.
Shows smart management.
All right, and finally here on News or Not, Microsoft announced a multi-year deal with AT&T worth about $2 billion. AT&T will move to Microsoft 365 services and will adopt Azure infrastructure. The deal will also have the two companies working together on 5G development. News or not here, Stephen?
I like this.
Yes.
Honestly, Azure has been growing. Azure has been doing great stuff, and they just landed a $5 billion, no, sorry,
Yeah,
$2 billion
come on.
customer. I mean, wow, that's pretty cool. No, I'm definitely pro Azure.
Yeah, and you know, I think for a while, maybe the perception was, hey, if you're a competitor of Amazon, you don't want to give them money, maybe go to Azure. But they've really, I mean, one, Microsoft has taken a very cloud forward stance. It's not a secret to anybody. But two, not just being the alternative, making a real use case for themselves. And this clearly demonstrates that
Yep.
as well.
Also, there's a lot more in going on in 5G than I realized. I'm just a little aside here.
Mhm.
I went to Dell Technologies World and HPE Discover this year. They paid my way, and I'm supposed to say that. I mean, FTC,
Hashtag sponsor.
hashtag sponsored. Anyway, one of the things that I learned at these events, because my kind of going in was like, dude, what does Dell and HP have to do with 5G?
Mhm.
It's a lot more than the radios, and in fact, there's going to be a lot of compute, a lot of data center work going on there, and I think that that's going to be a big angle here because we're going to hear about it as 5G, and we're going to say, what does that have to do with computing? There's a lot of computing going on.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that with the Microsoft deal, like mention that in the Microsoft deal because they're not usually thrown out there with that. So very interesting as well. First up on our discussion here, we had kind of mentioned a survey of CIOs last week, talking about that Microsoft Teams seems to be getting a lot of traction. And then Microsoft actually came out and revealed that its Teams messaging platform, Microsoft Teams, has 13 million daily active users and 19 million weekly active users, aka people that just log in, I guess, once a week. Slackers, you should be ashamed of yourself. It's the first time they're really reporting these numbers. It appears to surpass their competitor Slack, which reportedly had, or not reportedly, which reported 10 million daily active users in its S1 filing with the SEC back in April. That's the document they have to file before they go public. So that has to be accurate, right? Microsoft bundles their teams as part of Office 365 subscriptions for businesses, while Slack revealed in its S1 filing that 88,000 organizations use their paid tier, which sounds, I guess, fine. But when you look at it, they have almost 600,000 organizations that use their service, and the vast majority of them are just on the free tier. Uh, you know, One, surprised to see Microsoft Teams, really only a 3-year-old product, surpassing Slack, which I think is seen as the leader, or has been seen as a leader and an innovator in this space. And two, is Slack getting Snapchatted here?
Well, I think it's indefinite or undoubtedly true that Slack is getting Snapchatted here. That Microsoft is after them with a bullet, and also, I mean, I don't want to sound all like DOJ in the '90s, but I mean, Microsoft has a lot of market clout, and they have a lot of ability to push people toward their products.
Mhm.
Personally, I know people who are using Teams and love it. So it's kind of the contrast to the Facebook story a few
Yeah.
minutes ago.
Yeah.
In fact, we've had disclaimer, we here at Gestalt IT are one of the paying Slack customers. We use it quite a lot.
You're welcome, Slack.
Our other some of the other organizations that we work with in this kind of enterprise IT influencer analyst space are Teams users, and they love it just as much. And so I think that there's basically there's a horse race starting here, and I think Microsoft deserves a lot of credit for putting together a product that people like.
Yeah, and I always say this. Microsoft doesn't get a lot of things. Whenever Microsoft comes out with a mobile product, I'm never going to trust that. It's going to probably be horrible. I kind of almost don't trust them on an OS front. Like they're like a 50-50 shot when it comes to OS. It's either brilliant or it's horrible. Uh Productivity, don't mess with like Microsoft gets that. So, yes, rolling it into Office 365 is a canny, almost old school Microsoft move,
Yeah,
right?
but
To
Office
push it.
365 itself was a brilliant move.
Yes.
So
And yeah, and so like that is a canny move to bundle it in, but getting if the numbers were 3 million daily active users and 19 million weekly active users, I would say it's like Facebook, or it's like Facebook Workplace, where it's a bunch of people that have it but don't really use it and maybe only use
yeah,
it for like an HR board. Um, Seeing that there are all of these daily active users, very impressive. I still think there's a definite avenue for Slack here, and I think their business model still can work in that they make it super easy to get on board with their service for free, make that very functional product, and then get you to pay for it later on. I still think that's a
mhm.
viable business model for them.
And I think there's still some entrenched resistance to Microsoft products. Um, Still,
Yeah,
again, some resistance. People, there are people who don't want to use the Microsoft product,
yeah,
and so they won't.
exactly. And yeah, and who's to say, somewhere down the line they don't make a partnership with, hey, maybe Amazon decides to buy them down the line, and all of a sudden
I
that
would
becomes
not
very
be
interesting.
at all shocked if
Although I don't
Slack
know, I
ended
don't know
up
how the
going to Amazon.
financials with all of their investors and how that would actually work out, but we'll see.
I've heard that Slack would be a very expensive purchase.
Yes, I'm sure there's all sorts of VC funding tied up in there and shareholder blah 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 blah. Next up here, not so good news for Microsoft. The Office of Data Protection and Information Freedom in the German state of Hesse, where the Hessians live, I'm told, it ruled that using Office 365 in schools is illegal as its default configuration risks exposing personal information of teachers and students to U.S. officials. This is a big deal because under GDPR and specifically German law, students don't have the right to basically consent to give their data away since they're minors. Um, the Hess Data Privacy Commissioner Michael
I was being a minor.
Ronellenfeich.
Yep.
I'm trying to say a difficult German name here, Stephen, and you're distracting me.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
The Hessian Data Privacy Commissioner Michael Ronellenfeich has
Ronald and
previously
Fitch.
what I listen. I got close. Don't judge me. Had previously ruled that Office 365 use was allowed if all data remained in Germany, but, and this was the case up until 2018, but a joint venture between Microsoft and Deutsche Telekom to provide a German only cloud shut down in 2018. Basically, they weren't making enough money. The commissioner recommended schools switch to using similar Office products with on premises licensing. Good to protect students' information, like all for that. But will this fundamentally change Microsoft's strategy in Europe, in a post GDPR world?
I'm surprised they shut it down if this was going to be the result. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if they were smart enough to open a German cloud to host data like this for use cases like this, I'm surprised that they were willing to then get out of it because however unprofitable it is, I absolutely can understand, especially countries in Europe. I used to work for a Swiss bank,
Mm-hmm.
and they were extremely careful about location of data and exfiltrating data from the boundaries of the nation. Was I helped a Swiss telecom company set up a cloud, proto cloud, pre cloud, 15 years ago before there really was a cloud. But I mean, we set up basically the equivalent in Switzerland. So just for this exact reason,
Mm-hmm.
because it would not have done to have the data get out. And with the GDPR and with other European regulations, I absolutely can understand Germans saying this. Frankly, I am with them as well on the idea of having data in the cloud, especially minors data. Here in the U.S., a lot of school districts, this one, um, do indeed use Google Suite and have kids using Chromebooks and storing data in the cloud, and I am intensely uncomfortable with that. I'm standing with the Germans on this one. I feel like they are making absolutely the right decision, and I am shocked that Microsoft doesn't have a good answer for it.
Well, and there was a story a couple of weeks ago that may have some interesting policy implications because it was reported that U.S. officials had informed data ministers in India, I forget the exact agency, that basically they were going to start limiting H-1B visas to countries that have strict data locality requirements, and kind of using that as a blunt force object to kind of force people into essentially having more U.S. friendly data policies. So I wouldn't be surprised if we possibly see that coming toward Germany down. I mean, this is one instance. This is not across Germany. This is just in one German state, but it's an interpretation of their laws that seemingly would be is not out of the realm of reasonable interpretation.
Yeah, it could spread, and maybe maybe they'll reopen their German Azure.
Yeah, we will see. I mean, yeah, maybe just be another thing of hey, Deutsche Telekom, here's bags of money.
Yeah.
Please reopen this.
Yeah.
Speaking of bags of money, sources tell the Wall Street Journal that the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, the old FTC, voted this week to approve a roughly $5 billion settlement with Facebook over an investigation into the tech giant's privacy violations. The vote was reportedly 3-2, with two of the commissioners voting against, wanting stricter restrictions on Facebook. So not against the fine, just against the severity of it. The settlement would need approval from the Justice Department before going into effect, but essentially that's a rubber stamp kind of situation, at least conventionally in the current policy climate. Who knows what common sense things will become difficult. The fine would be the largest for the federal government to levy on a tech company, vastly exceeding the laughable $22 million fine they assessed to Google in 2012. In its Q1 earnings report, to give some context of how this fits into Facebook's financials, Facebook recorded $15.08 billion in revenue and recorded a $3 billion charge for a then estimated FTC fine. So they basically paid over half of this, accounted for paying half of this already, and theoretically won't impact their earnings per share all that negatively in the next quarter. They could even spread that out probably to 2 quarters. I don't know what accounting chicanery you need to do there. In light of this, we haven't seen we haven't seen the full settlement. Let's just be clear on this. This is still being reported. I trust the Wall Street Journal reporting this. We haven't heard if there's going to be any kind of further sanctions against Facebook. I don't think there's going to be any policy shakeup in terms of divesting parts of Facebook. Certainly is off the table as part of the settlement. I don't think there's going to be any structural changes in terms of removing Mark Zuckerberg or anything like that. How does this signal any kind of change in how the U.S. wants to regulate privacy for these big tech companies, Stephen?
It doesn't.
I mean, $5 billion.
That was a very short answer to a very long question.
$5 billion is not an insubstantial amount of money, right? That's 10% of the Facebook's revenue for the last 4 quarters.
Indeed, and that's the interesting thing, is that the take on this is, we got away. That's actually kind of a lot of money. I mean, it's even a lot of money for Facebook.
Yeah.
It's maybe not enough to cause them to change their behavior, but it's quite a lot of money. And it's interesting to see that for example, their stock price went up when this was announced.
Well, because I think people were thinking, is Zuckerberg going to be out or be forced to divest some control of the board or something like that, and not seeing that, and basically seeing that they've already accounted for the vast majority of this fine. I think people were like, oh, okay, that's what is it? Buy on the rumor, sell on the news. I forget.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Buy
so
on
the
rumor,
opposite
sell on
of
the news.
what this
No,
was.
I think that the interesting aspect here is that regardless of the size of the fine, what people were really looking for was an actual structural change to Facebook, and they didn't get it. Instead, they got a fine. Now, we can argue whether that's a big fine or a little fine, but the bottom line is they're not going to change.
But given that this is 200 times the amount that Google paid 7 years ago, does this signal that at least, even if we're not going to force big tech to change policy, to change structurally, that will at least, I don't know, will hit them a little harder for violations like this going forward? I will say the reason this fine is so large, I think, is because this violates a previous 2011 FTC consent decree by Facebook. So there was some prior precedent that they still didn't change their ways 8 years later, and that maybe is why this fine is so large. But it does kind of set a precedent for how theoretically the FTC might find privacy violations in the future.
Yeah, and frankly, it would be a big precedent because not everybody's Facebook.
Yeah,
I mean, think of all the other. I'm a big, have I been pwned? I get email from them constantly, and imagine if the FTC fined some of those companies $1 billion.
Yeah,
I mean, that would be a big deal.
That would certainly be a big deal, or 10% of their revenue.
Or 10% of their revenue. I mean, yeah, it would put some of those companies out of business. So, yeah, I feel like it could set a precedent, and it could set an important and strong precedent. But for now,
All right, next up here, Amazon announced it plans to spend $700 million to retrain 100,000 U.S. employees by 2025. It's about a third of their overall U.S. workforce. Retraining will be offered to employees in corporate offices, tech hubs, fulfillment centers, retail stores, and transportation network. Pretty much across all of the big employment centers for Amazon. The Wall Street Journal cited examples like fulfillment center workers trained as IT support and corporate office workers trained in software engineering, but it also has nursing and aircraft mechanic training as well. Amazon says it's designed the retraining program around the needs of its own workforce, but participation in the program does not require you to stay working at Amazon. It's also founding its own accredited school specifically for machine learning to be part of this program. Its fastest growing job areas include data mapping specialists, data scientists, solutions architect, and security engineers. Kind of some of the people that'd be maybe interested in reading Gestalt IT. So 100,000 new readers would be nice.
Yeah.
Amazon is trying to. Is this? I guess in my thinking of this, is this Amazon trying to avoid layoffs of unskilled labor once all of their automation hits in a couple of years, or is this maybe a recognition that these jobs are the key to their future profitability, i.e., Amazon things like Amazon Web Services and not shipping 99-cent power dongles to people?
I'm really not sure what they're doing here. I think that the bottom line is that Amazon is being pretty smart here,
Mhm.
doing something interesting, doing something different. I mean, there's different takes. My first take on seeing this story was that it's a CYA against a big fine or a attack from the right on Amazon, basically laying off all sorts of warehouse workers or something
Yeah,
like that. I mean, it seems to me like they're trying to be ready to not look like terrible people when robots take all of our jobs.
or when there's the story next week that they are investing $2 billion in automation technology or something like that to
Yeah,
displace to displace a large amount of their workforce.
exactly. That's exactly what I'm looking at here, and so but that's kind of being cynical. The non-cynical approach, well, and even honestly, the cynical, even the realistic approach is to look at it and say, well, gosh, this is pretty awesome. I'm glad that they're focusing on retraining instead of just basically bringing in the robots and then leaving them on the street.
Any surprise to see? I mean, security, data scientists, machine learning specialists.
Yeah.
You know, pretty representative, I think, of where we're seeing a lot of the jobs in IT coming from. A lot of the new jobs, at least, coming from at least. So kind of emerging fields, not even necessarily just plugging them into fix the printer driver.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. These are not yeah, the printer's on fire
Yeah.
kind of jobs. And that's actually really cool. I wonder if they'll be able to do it. I wonder if this is something that people will be interested in. I mean, there have been some pushback sometimes on job retraining programs when companies propose retraining into areas that people just frankly aren't interested in. But hopefully there's a variety of topics here that people might want to actually get into.
Yeah, and I will say, I've heard some criticism of this, that Amazon is getting credit because of the scale of this, because if you actually divide out the amount of money that they're investing in the number of employees, it actually falls slightly below average corporate retraining
Oops.
amounts. And it's like the fact that you can say it's $700 million for 100,000 employees. That's a great headline. But also, Amazon, I think, has a larger proportion of relatively unskilled labor in their workforce. And so, even that investment, I think, is not to give them too much credit, but goes a long way,
Yeah.
is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And finally, I want to finish up on this. We had reported last week about the whole Zoom issue that they were having, security issue they were having. And after the disclosure of Zoom's security vulnerability last week, security researcher Karen Lyons found that some exploits affected Ring Central, which is just a white box version of Zoom that 350,000 businesses use, and the Chinese version Zoomu. This is a vulnerability that installed a localhost web server that allows a maliciously crafted URL to automatically make users join a call with video and microphone enabled, and could be embedded into a web page. It also had this really great feature where if you had previously had the Zoom app installed and you didn't have it installed, it would reinstall it and not tell you, which is amazing. Apple confirmed yesterday that they have rolled out another silent update to basically kill this and remove the localhost web server from there. The functionality won't be disrupted. You'll just have to click through to formally join into a web conference, which is kind of how it should have worked to begin with. Zoom has earned a lot of goodwill kind of up until this point, I think, especially with the IT crowd, of being the least hateable, web conferencing, teleconferencing solution. How bad is this for the company? And do we need to reevaluate the convenience versus security equation in web conferencing, Stephen?
Well, first, web conferencing is terrible.
Yes, all web
Um,
conferencing is terrible.
oh,
Zoom maybe was the least
Zoom was
terrible.
less terrible.
Yeah.
Well, we use Uber Conference. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's non-terrible, but
Mhm.
it's not widely used. Um, the truth is that well, I'm going to go back to John Gruber's been talking about this. His term non-consensual software. Um,
That's not bad.
is it's totally exact. That's what this is. I mean, essentially, what we've done is the Zoom left a piece of non-consensual software on your computer that you didn't know about, that you didn't want, and that could do terrible things. And one of the questions posed to him and to all of us is Apple's response to that more non-consensual software?
Yeah, that's the only problem I think. Not even a problem because it's kind of been not rumored. It's been reported that Apple has this ability to roll out for like 0-day exploits and
And they
stuff
have
like
done
that.
it before.
Yeah, they've done it before. They've just never come out and said that they've done it before. This is significant that they come out now twice in basically 2 weeks. I think because of the popularity of these apps and come out and said, "We killed this. It's not a problem." Um, I also feel like though when you're buying into even though Mac OS is a open system that you can just install software on it, you know, Apple, anything when you're buying into Apple, you're also buying into either the walled garden or the gilded cage. You can call it either one, depending on how cynical you want to be or how negatively you want to look at that model. And so I guess I'm not surprised that they kind of retain this ability still, even though I trust Apple relatively with this. It's in their best interest, right, not to do this and do it poorly or do it maliciously or do it for any other reason than to keep users happy, right? It's still concerning. I don't have to worry about that on Windows, I guess is what I'm saying. Although I guess Windows just installs updates willy nilly now, and so
Yeah, I mean,
you're on this.
Microsoft can
You're on
do the
this.
same thing. They can push out a software fix for something like this as
This is
well.
true. Well, and they would just roll it into your weekly Windows 10 update that
Yeah.
is always sitting there in your dock.
And Apple could very well have done that. Frankly, my opinion. So I had the Zoom client installed. I had the web server.
Mhm.
I read the paper and removed it from my own machine. I'm actually really glad to know that it's been removed from everybody's machines, because basically everybody in our office, I mean, I imagine that you've probably installed the Zoom client at some
Yes.
point.
Yes.
I know that the rest of the folks have, and frankly, it would have been a big hassle for us to go through and remove it from all those things. Um, so I'm okay with it.
Or
But I see gray area here. There could be a slippery slope. What if Apple decided to push out a fix that disabled Amazon Music or
or
whatever?
the or the Chinese government says, "Hey, kill this functionality of this private encrypted messaging app that runs on Mac." Again, that's
Or
wholly theoretical. Or the U.S. government.
or if the ex government decides that they can figure out how to pretend to be Apple and roll out a silent fix
Yes,
a
yes.
fix on your machine that does stuff. I mean, it could happen. And
Stephen, that is a depressing note, and that is exactly how I want to end the Gestalt IT rundown for this week. Thank you so much for being on, Stephen. Always a pleasure to be in meat space with someone and be doing a show.
sure, meat
Meat
space.
space, yes, IRL.
IRL.
Stephen, if people are interested in finding out more about you and what you're up to, where can they look?
They could look right here. I'm just to the right of you or left of you, whatever.
Stephen, I think you know what I meant.
Yeah, I know what you meant. You can find me on Twitter at sfoskett. You can also find me at gestaltit.com at your favorite Tech Field Day videos. I'll be participating in all sorts of other things too. You'll find me on Thwack Camp with SolarWinds. You'll find me
Very cool.
on LinkedIn. You can all sorts of good places.
And you can find me on Twitter at Mr. Anthropology, MR Anthropology. You can find me at gestaltit.com and probably other places with those relatively same handles. So until the next time we meet, which is Wednesdays, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, remember, everybody, have a super sparkly day.